You are very welcome to yet another section of academic research writing. My name is Alan from Professional Writers, and today we are going to be looking at how to write a problem statement of your academic research document. A problem statement is one of the most essential sections in your academic research paper that is going to be looked at mostly by the person who is going to be evaluating your document or by your supervisor. So this is something that we want to give a lot of effort, because even when you go for defense, this is something that you are going to be defending. So in this session, we are going to go through the different components of a good problem statement, and we shall see how you can incorporate all this in your own research and make your research document a better document to look at. Okay, so let's start with I'll just hide myself up here. What exactly is a problem statement? So a problem statement is just a clear, concise description of the issue or the challenge that your study is going to address. And that is the whole point. So it is written to outline the gap that exists between the current situation and then the ideal state that you would prefer in case the problem that you want to address was not existent. As you can see, a problem statement is a very short statement. And it is called a statement because it is only a single statement. They are not called paragraphs or a long essay. It is just a statement that intends to describe the problem. It is in most cases advised that you write your problem statement in only half of a page because it has to be very concise and short. The problem statement should not take more than 1 minute for someone to read it. And in most cases, when someone is evaluating your document, this is the first place they come to. So this is something that we want to give a lot of thought, and we give it a lot of effort such that it brings out the kind of problem description that we want. So we are going to go into looking at each of the components of a problem statement. Okay? So let's start by looking at what we call the ideal. So a problem statement, the first thing that you are going to talk about is the ideal. So what exactly is the ideal? So the ideal part is the part that describes how the system should be functioning in the absence of the problem that your research is going to address. Let us assume a situation where the problem that your research is going to address does not exist. What would that situation look like? This is what we want to have, okay? So we want to start by articulating the ideal scenario or the condition that you aim to achieve through your research, because we are thinking that if you do your research and then you address this problem, you are going to have a problem-free society, a problem-free company, or the study area where you're doing it, it is going to be cured of that problem. So that is the ideal. So take an example of the topic that we have been looking at. We want to understand the effect of employee motivation on employee performance. So we want to understand what is the relationship there. But by the time we did that, we have some reason to believe that the performance of employees in this company is not the best. And that is why we want to do this study and address the performance issues, okay? And also address the performance magnitude that we have. So in the ideal statement, we want to create a condition that should happen in case every employee was motivated to the maximum. So a statement like that would sound in some way, for instance, if we say employee motivation in public entities is expected to result in enhanced productivity, sufficient service delivery, and improved overall performance. So that is the ideal. That is what we want, okay? And every person who is starting a company or every public entity employs people with the assumption that they are going to achieve the ideal. So what is that assumption? What is that ideal that is going to be achieved is what we want to write about in this part of the ideal statement. I think this now makes a lot of sense to you. So you're going to come up with a single statement of the ideal. This has to just be a single sentence. It doesn't have to be two sentences, just a single sentence to represent what the ideal situation should be. You know, children who sleep under a mosquito net should be free from malaria. Okay. Employees who are motivated should produce efficiently and should be in love with what they do. That is the ideal. That is what we expect. So that is what you're first going to write in that statement. And then after you've written the ideal, we are going to go ahead and now talk about the reality. Other people call this reality the problem. So we also want to write a single sentence that is describing our reality. And that is obtained from the current statistics that represent the reality. Okay? So take an example of our topic that we are working with, the impact of employee performance the impact of employee motivation on performance in public entities. So if that is the topic that we are going with, what is our reality? What is the performance of these employees in other entities? Okay, so if we have said that the impact of employee motivation on performance in public entities in Uganda, and then we say a case of Ministry of Environment. So now the topic wants to address the public entities that exist in the entire country. And then when we contextualize, we want to come to the Ministry of Environment because that is a public entity on its own. So since we have said that we want to understand the impact of employee motivation on performance in public entities in Uganda, we are going to look for a reality for the country, for Uganda, okay? So we are going to look for ways in which we represent performance as a country. So we could say that maybe performance of employees in public entities has been falling gradually. So this has to be quantified in some way. And this is going to also represent the problem that we want to address in our study. So we need to see where do we get information that talks about performance of employees in public entities. Can we get it from public reports? Can we get it from reports from these entities that they publish? Okay, so where can we get them? So if we can get those, then we need to see a way of quantifying the reality that is happening in the country. So the example that I gave here is, however, the performance of the employees is still low, with only 44% of employees performing at optimal standards. And then we shall have to quote that statement. We have to put a reference from where we got that. And that is in most cases obtained from public reports, from public websites, and any other public publication. So that is where we get that reality. But that is not the source that is going to happen for you, depending on where you're doing your research study from. Maybe your topic is not set to address issues of public entities in the entire country. And maybe you're focusing on a state, on one state, or you're focusing on a district, or you're focusing on a village. Okay, so it depends on how you are focusing your study. So you could be doing a study that is addressing a certain problem among different villages. And then you have chosen one village as the case study. So you have to give us the reality of what happened in those villages, because that is the way in which you also realize that there was a problem. Otherwise, if you don't have the reality, how did you know that this problem actually exists? And that is the question that you'll be asked while you're defending. And if you don't have a way in which you can quantify it, it's very difficult for you to address that. So the next component of your problem statement is going to be the consequences of the reality. So what is consequences? Consequences means what happens if the reality is happening. In our case, if there is poor performance of employees, what consequences does that have? So we want to explain the negative impacts or the consequences resulting from the current situation. So this should detail how the reality problem affects the efficiency, okay, of the ideal system under the study. So we want to understand, for instance, if employees are underperforming, what is going to happen? So in our case, we could write something like employee performance. Poor employee performance could lead to decreased productivity, lower team morale, increased workload for others, customer dissatisfaction, a negative impact on company reputation, financial losses, increased turnover. So there are so many things. So we want to see a way of explaining the consequences of this reality. And this is going to be important because it is going to mean that if we do not do this study, this problem is going to remain here. These consequences are going to still happen here, and these bad things are going to be happening. So that is somehow justifying why we need to go ahead and do this study. So we need to talk about all these consequences. You might not mention all, but you might mention the major ones. You could mention like 5 or 6 major consequences of the problem in case things remain the way they are. Okay? So that's the consequence. So the next thing we need to talk about is what we call the interventions. So what are interventions? So we start by thinking that, are we really the first people to observe that there is a problem? Let's say this is a public entity. We have structures, we have executive directors, we have managers, we have ministers, we have the president. Is it true that all this period that this problem has been existent, none of these people has bothered to even look at it? Okay, so it is really not very practical for us to think that we are the first people to see the problem. So in most cases, there is someone else who has seen the problem. And in most cases, they have done something to try and address that problem. So we need to acknowledge those interventions that have been done by other people in order to address the problem. So we need to acknowledge the intervention and who did the intervention. So for instance, we say we want to describe the concerned bodies that have tried to put in place ways to solve the problem. Okay, so we could say maybe the government, what the government has done to solve the problem. That is, if the government has seen that there is actually a problem that is existent. Or we could talk about what the management of the public entity has done to see that they address the problem. Or we could talk about the employees themselves. What have they done to see that they motivate themselves, for instance? So we need to always talk about those different strategies that have been employed by the different people or the different bodies to help and avert the problem. But we need to end by a statement which shows that, however, despite the interventions that have been done by these different bodies and people, the problem is still existent. And that is why we want to do a study and see if our study is going to bring up new solutions that are going to complement on the existing solutions such that we address the problem that we have. So for instance, in our example, the Ministry of Finance, with assistance from different NGOs, have tried to come up with potential interventions, such as implementing comprehensive motivational programs, offering recognition of employees, increasing salaries of people, giving awards, these things have been done to help motivate employees. But why is it that even when people were given allowances, even when people were given rewards, even when people were recognized, there is still poor performance of our employees? And that is what we want to address. So if you come up with a new reason as to why all these things have happened, but the performance is still poor, that is new knowledge that you're adding onto the research arena. So that is what we want to be doing as interventions. So the next thing after the interventions is what we call the magnitude. So the magnitude is going to help us to specify the scale or the extent of the problem by quantifying that problem in most cases. So we want to understand, how can we quantify our problem? So our problem now is going to be measured at the specific place where we are going to collect our data, and that is called the study setting. So we want to understand, in our study setting or in our study area, what is the quantity of the problem. So let's say we're talking about performance. How do we measure performance? Okay. So now you could look at your dependent variable. In this case, we have performance as the dependent variable. So if performance is the dependent variable, we need to ask ourselves, how can we measure performance? Okay. So if we can measure performance directly, maybe if we go to the reports, the human resource reports, and then the human resource officers have done a good job of helping us to calculate the performance that they achieved in a specific period of time, maybe 12 months, and they have that in a report somewhere, we can just go and pick it. But what we always want to do is we want to ask ourselves, what is the indicator of the dependent variable? Or what is going to help us to indicate the magnitude? Let's take an example of performance. So what do you look at for you to conclude that this employee is performing well or this employee is performing poorly? That is what we want. Can we judge that by the time that they show up at the workplace? Can we judge that by the tasks they complete? Can we judge that by what? So you as a researcher, you have to think very hard and come up with a mechanism in which you're going to quantify the problem. In this case, your dependent variable. So if we, for instance, we say that we want to quantify it by understanding the number of tasks that are completed by this specific employee, we could say, okay, in 2024, how many employees do we have? And then we say we have 100 employees. Okay, out of the tasks that we gave the 100 employees, how many tasks were done to completion? And then we can quantify a percentage. And then we can say that maybe 5 employees refused or failed to finish their tasks as they were given to them. And then we also calculate to what extent did they perform those tasks. Okay, did they perform the tasks to 50% and they stopped there? Did they perform the tasks to 25%, to 75%, or to 100%? So if we can come up with such a calculation, it can help us quantify the level of performance at that specific company or that specific public entity. And if we have that quantified, it is the one that we are going to put in the magnitude to show whoever is reading this problem statement that at this specific ministry, for instance, if we choose the Ministry of Water and Environment, this specific Ministry of Environment, this is what the problem stands at. Okay. And if we have that, then we have quantified the magnitude. So at the Ministry of Water and Environment, human resource reports for the last 3 years indicate a decline in performance by 44%, 33%, maybe 31%. So this one is showing a decline. Okay. So it is from the magnitude that we see the trend with which the problem has been existent in the past, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. So if we see that the problem has been increasing, then that is bad. So we need to do something in order to stop the problem from progressing. And that is what we call a magnitude. And it is from this magnitude to which we are going to go and get the research gap. So in the research gap, we want to identify what is lacking in the existing literature or the understanding that is that we already have. So in most cases, you might find that so many people have studied performance of employees, but there is a dearth of information that is regarding to the relationship between performance and motivation. And that is what you want to address as a researcher. So you can think of what research gap that you're going to address. Since you now know the magnitude of the problem, you know that it has been increasing, you can identify a gap and see which areas have not been explored a lot. And that is the new knowledge that you're going to put up. So you have seen that you have identified the different interventions that have been done, but then you have also seen that these interventions have not done a lot. And when you do your study, maybe you're going to come up with something that is more worthwhile. Okay, so literally, those are the components of a good problem statement. And these are, each of them is just a sentence. Each of them is just a sentence. And you're going to have a problem statement, which is just half page. Of course, after you have talked about your gap, that is what has motivated you to go ahead and do the study. So you could have talked about the gap, and then this has motivated the researcher to go ahead and conduct a study about motivation and performance. So with that, you will really have a very good problem statement. I want to talk a little bit about the common mistakes that people make while writing a problem statement. One, people write very long problem statements, which is a very big mistake. Your problem statement has to be just short and concise and straight to the point. Then we have generalization of information, which is not good. We want to only talk about information that is happening in our study setting and maybe in the nation where we are doing. But I have seen people putting global statistics in problem statements, which are not really important. Sometimes people tend to ignore the magnitude. Magnitude is very important because if you don't put the magnitude in your research and you're defending your research, they're going to ask you, why did you choose that study area, for instance? If you have chosen a company, they are going to ask you, why did you choose that company? Okay? So the only reason as to why you chose that company is because you had a certain way of knowing that there is a problem that is existent. But that certain way of knowing is only represented by a magnitude. You cannot just say that for me, I think that there is a problem here. No, there has to be a proven way of seeing that there is a problem. Because if you don't have that magnitude, they will tell you there are so many companies. Why did you choose that specific company? Why didn't you do your study in another company? Okay, so to avoid all those problems, you please need to put a magnitude. There is only a single exception in this magnitude. That is if you're doing a completely qualitative study. Sometimes if you're doing a qualitative study and maybe you're trying to evaluate the experiences of people, for instance, if you're saying you want to evaluate the experiences of patients with cancer towards chemotherapy treatment, you might not really be able to measure the experiences. Okay, so in that case, you should find a way of qualitatively measuring the experiences. Maybe when you talk to patients, they showed they had fear, they had anxiety, they had regret. So that somehow represents a magnitude in a qualitative study. But if you're doing a quantitative study or a mixed study, and even some other types of qualitative studies, we always need you to quantify the magnitude of the problem in your study area. The last mistake is unnecessary statements and statistics that people put in this, the problem statement. And this makes the statement very bulky and very difficult to understand. So with this under your belt, you can go ahead and improve this problem statement that you have and write a very good problem statement. Thank you so much for listening to me. My name is Alan. I still want to invite people who want to join our premium coaching program, where we teach you how to do academic research from start to finish. If you're already writing your own academic research, you can join us and you can be using these insights to improve what you have, such that by the time you take it to your supervisor, by the time you go for defense, you already know what you're going to be talking about. Thank you so much. If you're interested in that, you can just send me a DM on our WhatsApp and we will respond to you and we put you in the program. Thank you. Let me see you there.